Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again today. And we just want to go ahead and be upfront at the beginning here. We are having some technical issues with the website. We've contacted AT&T about that, and that is something that they are addressing. So if you have any colleagues or friends in the industry that are having trouble logging on, just please send them the email link that we've just forwarded out, or have them check their inbox, because we did send out the direct link to the Zoom meeting. So, all right, without further ado, looks like we have quite a few people who were able to log in. Good afternoon. I'm so glad you've all continued with us today for these informative workshops. In March, Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, the CARES Act, which included $25 billion in transit funding for rural and urban areas across the country. Funding included in the act is allocated to transit operations to protect public health and safety while ensuring transportation access to jobs, medical treatment, food, and other essential services remain available during the COVID-19 response. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from the FTA Region VII staff on protocols and next steps for long-term recovery. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. And we will address them towards the end of the session. And unless you're presenting, please put yourself on mute. And just want to thank everybody again. Thank you, FTA, particularly FTA Region VII, for being here with us today. I know you brought a whole complement of staff, so I can't wait to find out a little bit more about each of you and what you've got for us in store of CARES Act update. Eva, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Ava Steinman, your Regional 7 Community Planner for Missouri and Kansas. On behalf of Secretary Chow, we'd like to welcome everyone to the second day of the Missouri Public Transit Association Conference. Hats off to everyone for putting together a great virtual conference. There's been a lot of wonderful content thus far. Due to scheduling conflicts, our Regional Administrator, Makti Ahmad, and Deputy Regional Administrator, Mark Bechtel, couldn't be with us for this session, but I know that they wish that they could be here. Let me begin by thanking each of you for the incredible dedication, perseverance, creativity you have all shown day in and day out in continuing to provide quality public transportation services to the communities across the state of Missouri, especially during these unprecedented times with the global pandemic. I have a handful of my Region 7 colleagues with me here today that are going to provide you with some updates on what is going on at the federal level, as well as in the region. We will start out with Jeremiah Schuler, one of our grant managers who many of you have had the pleasure of working with, to give us an update on the grant status in the region, as well as some oversight and CARES funding updates. Then our regional engineer, Cindy Moses, will be updating everyone on the safety plan requirements and brief us on the latest capital improvement projects in the state of Missouri. After Cindy, we will hear from our newest member of the Region 7 team, Jason Pollock. Jason comes to us from KDOT and will be the legal counsel for the region. We are very grateful to have him on board. We also recently welcomed another new member to our regional staff, Jerry Doyle. Not only is it great to work with her again, we're both former MoDOT transplants, but I'm very thankful to have another planner on the team. She and I will be tag teaming a presentation on transit trends pre and post pandemic. Before I hand it over to our grant manager, just wanted to go back over that quick housekeeping item. Please be sure to utilize the chat feature to ask any questions throughout the session. And we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end, but if we don't get to them, we will follow up with you afterwards if we run out of time. So take it away, Jeremiah.
Thanks, Ava, appreciate it. Well, I guess good afternoon, everyone. As Ava said, my name is Jeremiah Schuler. I'm with the Federal Transit Administration here in Region 7, and just want to take a little bit of your time and give you some updates on what we've been up to in the Region 7 office this year and what we've done here in the state of Missouri. It's obvious that it's been a very busy year for all of you, and it's basically been the same for us here in Region 7. So also, first off, if you have me maximized on your screen, I apologize to you. This is your time to correct it. I know I need a haircut. So get that out of the way. Anyway, we're pleased to participate in MPTA this year and to continue supporting public transportation in the state. Throughout this conference, I've heard a lot of discussion about funding and support. So I think I'm going to start out by, just giving you a rundown of some of our financial support FTA has put into the state, as well as some of our COVID relief efforts. And then at the end, we'll do just a brief update on our FY 2021 oversight plan. So as everyone knows, it's been mentioned several times here, our FTA's COVID response was to, distribute that $25 billion nationally for transit as part of the CARES Act. And we're pleased to say that we've awarded or allocated all of those funds that were set aside for Missouri. MoDOT, kudos to you, special congratulations for being the first grant awarded in the country. That's really a feather in your cap for Joni and her staff. We know a lot of work went into that. Headquarters has given you guys a lot more shout outs than you'll ever know. And so, that was really great for all of us. In addition to the CARES Act, we also allowed some of our typical annual allocated 5307 and 5311 funds to be converted into emergency relief funds. And not that wasn't really quite as popular, but we've had a couple of those within the region. So, so what does all that mean to Missouri? The $25 billion. In all, Region 7 awarded around an additional $300 million this year within the state. And that's in addition to the typical around $160 million of formula funds that we typically allocate within the state. So you can see that is a dramatic increase in response to the COVID relief efforts. So in all, Region 7, I think we've put out about $460 million in the state of Missouri. And that includes CARES funds, our normal 5307, 5311, 5310 planning funds, things like that. And it also includes the recently announced $50.8 million in capital investment grant funds for the KC streetcar expansion project that we're extremely proud to be a partner in that transformative project. So that's just kind of a brief snapshot of some of the financial support that we've been engaged in the state of Missouri, and it's quite a significant increase over previous years. In addition to the financial support during these times, we also really responded to the direct need of transit providers and passengers by distributing face coverings to transit agencies. Our first wave was to distribute directly to the agencies for their frontline employees and drivers and operators so that they continue carrying out the essential mission of getting people to places that they need to go, employment and healthcare. The next wave, we sent some coverings out to each agency to distribute to passengers so we can maintain safe environments and things like that and manage the spread. So in all, in the state of Missouri, we distributed about 132,000 face coverings within the state. So we were happy to do that. And we hope that really made an impact on how operations were able to carry forward. So you can see Region 7, we've had our hands full, and we've been really happy to support transit in Missouri in all of those ways. I know I've gone through some of those numbers pretty quick, and if there are some questions or anything like that, please enter it in. And then lastly, I just wanted to go over some of our oversight plan. And I know this affects a lot of people here in Missouri who were, had some pending FY20 triennial reviews or perhaps a state management plan. So FTA has gotten together, and as part of our continuing effort to accommodate this uncertainty within this pandemic, we've decided to implement new procedures for our oversight process. And so basically we're looking at backing up all of our reviews 1 year. So for example, if you had a FY 2020 review, that review will be conducted in FY 2021. If you have a FY 21 review, that review will be conducted in FY 2022, et cetera. And so I think that's going to be welcome news to everyone. There are substantial changes that are bookmarked for the 2021 reviews. And when I say 2021, that was actually if you had a 2020 review, because it's backed up. but they're all going to be virtual. That review schedule will start early in the calendar year 2021, and they may ask for supplemental information because it's been a while. And part of that supplemental information is going to include information on whether or not your CARES Act grants or any ER relief grants, that they'll just want to know and be able to provide oversight on those. Part of that oversight plan will also be to verify that all of our recipients have completed their public transportation agency safety plans. Contractor discussions and interviews with recipient staff will all be conducted virtual. There will be no physical, meaning there's also going to be no physical inspection of FTA funded assets and walkthroughs of facilities that typically happen during the triennial review process. That supplemental information request that I did mention a minute ago, they're eyeballing around next month, October, to where they may start sending those out. So definitely watch your inboxes for those. And then the site visits will start after the calendar year 2021. Those are the big updates that I think most people will be interested in as far as the upcoming FTA oversight plan. And if there's any questions on that, please reach out to Bill Kalt or Jessica Gladstone, who have kind of taken the lead in managing and scheduling those oversight activities. And I think that is it for me, Ava. So I don't know if Cindy, you want to just go now?
Hi, yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Cindy Moses. I am the regional engineer with FTA Region VII. I have been with FTA for 12 years, and I have 25 years experience as a federal government engineer and project manager. So I've been working on a lot of construction and capital projects for many, many years. I primarily work on the very large capital construction projects, and that's been a lot of my focus with FTA, and I tend to get involved after projects have gone through the planning phase, working with Ava and Kathy and her staff and Jerry now, and then also when NEPA is done. So I work closely with them, make sure I have some input into the initial phases, but they really kind of come to my shop after they've gone through that process. And so as Ava mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about two things today, a little bit about some of the projects that have been going on in Missouri and how COVID has impacted them, and then also the safety program that FTA has. So I'm going to start with the capital projects. For our region, and then kind of what we've been hearing throughout the rest of the country, is that COVID has not had as much of a negative impact on projects that are currently in construction or have been in the pipeline. So that is good news in the sense of a lot of the bad news that has come out is that the projects have really been able to proceed as planned for the most part. And then some have even been able to move along faster because they haven't had to deal with traffic or some of the other competing projects that they might have. So that's been really good for a lot of the construction projects that have been going on. FTA's capital projects that have occurred in Missouri recently that are worth giving some note to is that the KCATA just completed the Prospect BRT project at the end of last year, and they opened up a new transit center I want to say about a month ago, and it's a really state-of-the-art, beautiful facility. And so we're really excited that that will be able to be completed in the Kansas City area. And that project was funded under what's called our Capital Investment Grant Program. It's the FTA's largest program for funding construction projects. There are many different programs that grantees can get funding for capital projects. You can get it through our formula programs, through some of the discretionary programs like the bus and bus facilities, and then through the build program, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. But the CIG program, which is called Capital Investment Grant Program, that is FTA's largest program and probably the most difficult program because it's the most competitive. You're competing against a lot of the projects that are throughout the nation that are the large billion-dollar rail projects. So you're in a pot of funding and a pot of projects with some of the most high-profile projects. So to be in that program is very difficult. It's a very challenging program, and it's really great that we've had some Region 7 projects in that program and some in Missouri. So that really says a lot for the state of Missouri to be able to have a project that has successfully gone through the CIG program. And then we have another one that's in the queue, which is the Kansas City Streetcar Main Street Extension, which is a 3.5-mile extension of the streetcar from Union Station down to the Plaza and the UMKC area. And to get through this program, we've been working very, very hard on this project for several years now. And as Jeremiah had mentioned, just recently got a funding allocation for a portion of the funding and was also recently granted approval to go to the next phase. There are these gates that you have to kind of go through. There's the project development phase, and then you have to get approval from Congress to go to the next phase. And we received that approval in May for that project to go to the engineering phase, and is currently working now towards what we call an FFGA, which is a full funding grant agreement. So it's a very large effort, a very high profile effort that gets attention to a project in Missouri on the national scale. So that's just great news for Missouri, and it'll be a lot of work for our region, our staff, and for the KCATA and the Kansas City, Missouri, and the Streetcar Authority team. And we're really excited to be a part of that. The BUILD program is another really great program that we're able to do a lot of projects through, and that, like the other ones, are moving along as planned during this COVID environment. So that's good news. The BUILD program, as I mentioned, was previously the Tiger program, and we've had several projects in Region 7 and in Missouri. St. Louis just completed about a year ago the Cortex Tiger program, which was an infill station along their existing light rail line. It was a new station in between two existing stations that they had to build and get operating while continuing to operate their light rail. So that was a great project to get going in the St. Louis area that they were able to successfully complete. So just another kudos for a large capital project in the state of Missouri. And we have several other ones that have been in our region. We've got Omaha is completing a BRT project in Omaha, Nebraska, and that received Tiger funding. And then we have a rural project that we just awarded a build grant to in Siouxland, which is in Sioux City, Iowa. And so that got 100% federal funding under the build program that was awarded a few years ago, and we just now awarded the grant. I think there's going to be an announcement out soon, or if it hasn't already come out, for the current round of build grants. That program has been a very popular program within FTA and the DOT. The build program is essentially the same as the Tiger program, and I've been working that program for about 10 years. It's been popular within all states, within both parties on the political side, and so you know, you never know what's going to happen in the future, but I think that's been a program that's been an easy way to get some really good projects out. And so I would encourage all grantees to kind of be ready for any of the discretionary programs or some of the notice of funding availabilities and opportunities that will come out when you have these not really pandemics, but the ebbs and flows of the construction industry. It's either feast or famine. And so you never know if there will be a stimulus program that's going to be, you know, because of the outfall of the pandemic, and they might be, you know, putting a big infrastructure bill out, or another ARA type program like we saw 10 years ago. So I would encourage you to be looking at ways to maybe have some projects ready to go so that you can apply for those programs when they come out, because usually there's a really quick turnaround. And so continue to work with our planning office and our NEPA office to get those projects as ready to go so that you're ready to maybe get a piece of that pie if it comes. Secondly, on the safety aspect, FTA's safety program has really taken a turn over the last several years, whereas when I first started with FTA did not have any regulatory authority in the safety realm. And with the MAP 21 authorization and then the subsequent FAST Act, FTA was given a safety regulatory authority and has spent years developing their safety organization at the headquarters level, putting law in place and policies in place. And that has filtered down to one of the last elements of the program, which has been the PTAS, which stands for Public Transportation Agency Safety Plans. And because of COVID, that train, for lack of a better word, was put on pause. FTA was moving very quickly towards helping agencies become compliant with the regulatory rule to have transit, your PTASP in place by the July 20th deadline. And then when COVID hit, FTA shifted their focus to the CARES Act, and they put a pause on the requirement for the PTASP. Jane Williams sent out a notice of enforcement discretion in April, which allowed FTA to not really enforce the PTASP requirement until December 31st of this year. So everybody was given a little bit of relief to the requirements of the PTASP because of the COVID pandemic. Now we're starting to see that the headquarters safety program is going to start kind of pushing those agencies that don't have a compliant PTASP. They're going to start reaching out to them again. So you'll probably see a little bit more of an uptick in that requirement to try to get those programs in place. Many of the agencies in Missouri have already got safety certified PTASP. And so kudos to those of you that have. I know the rail agencies are used to working with our state safety oversight office on the safety requirements. And I think they're both, very in good standing and making sure that everything is ready to go to be in compliance. So kudos to them. Bus agencies, I know that's been a little bit harder. It's a little bit newer. And so if you don't have that in place, be expecting that you'll have our headquarters safety program be reaching out to you now. What they've done in the safety program is they're really managing that out of headquarters, and we're not really handling a lot of that in the region. And the goal is so that can be as consistent across the nation as possible. And they've have what they call a TAC, which is of course an acronym for Technical Assistance Center, that they have hired to help all of the agencies become compliant with the PTASP rules. And they've done a great job in providing resources, providing assistance, helping you review plans. If you go to our FTA website, right there on the front page is links to get to all of it. There's a webinar that's going to be next week, but they're always doing webinars. There's lots of resources out there, and they are the subject matter experts, and their goal is to help everybody become compliant with the PTAPs. So I encourage everybody to look into that, look for all the training that's available so that you can be compliant with that. And as Jeremiah mentioned, that FTA's way of providing some of the oversight in regulatory insurance to make sure that agencies are complying with their PTASP is they'll do it through the comprehensive reviews like the Trina reviews and the state management reviews. And there will also probably be certs and assurance associated with checking a box that you have a compliant agency safety plan that is been signed off by your accountable executive. And the last thing I will say is that I know that it's also on the safety plan. It's a big thing for our administration. It's related to the safety, but not exactly. It's just the pledge for the human trafficking, and many of you did sign that pledge. And those of us that were at the 4-state conference last year, I know there was a big push on that. And so the administration did have a big initiative to really do what we can in the transit agency to stop human trafficking. So thank you to all of you that have done that. So that is the end of what I have to talk about. I will put in some links to the PTASP in the chat box so that those are readily available for everyone. Thank you to everything that everybody has done to continue to work through all of this pandemic and to move projects along.
Thank you, Cindy. Jason, you want to jump in here?
Sure. Mine's just going to be a real brief introduction. As Ava had mentioned earlier, my name is Jason Pollock. I'm the new regional counsel here in Region 7. I've been at FTA about 2 months now, but before that, I was at the Kansas Department of Transportation for 7.5 years. I was really looking forward to joining the FTA, and I'm really looking forward to working with everyone out in Missouri. It's been a really good change so far, and it's been great to see the grant making process and specifically to see how efficient everyone's been with getting their CARES Act grants obligated. So again, reach out if you have any questions, and back to Ava.
Thanks, Jason. And yeah, we're really lucky to have you on board now here and excited to work with you. Jerry, you want to introduce yourself and start our presentation?
Thank you, Ava. I will. Hi, I'm Jerry Doyle. I am the other newbie in the Region 7 office. I've been in the office about 2 months as well, and I'm really excited to be working in transit. I actually started my career in transit before spending about 13 years with MoDOT, so I'm really excited to be back working with everyone again. I'm going to try to share my screen. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is my area actually is Iowa and Nebraska, so you all probably won't see me very often, but today I'm here to talk to you about transit trends pre-COVID. That seems like a very long time ago, but wasn't actually that far. So let me see if I can start this. Ava, can you see my screen?
Yeah, you're good, Jerry.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so transit trends pre-COVID, maybe. There we go. So I got some of this information from APTA. I was doing research after I knew that I was going to be giving this presentation, and APTA had these wonderful graphics. And so I would just go through what transit is, or what transit is up until COVID hit. So transit is more widespread than I think a lot of people realize. I don't even think I realized how many not-for-profits, over 4,000, are out actually providing public transportation in our system, helping people get to healthcare and jobs and those essential life functions. Here's another thing a stat that I thought was wonderful. Transit is much more accessible today than it was in 1993. Over the last 3 decades, you all nationwide transit providers have done a terrific job retrofitting, rehabbing, and replacing your vehicles so that now transit buses are 99% accessible, helping folks with mobility needs get to essential services and jobs so that they can live independent lives, which I think is a tremendous community asset, and you all deserve a large round of applause for that terrific work. Transit was also growing. We've been growing since 1995, pretty much. The graphic shows that the percent increase in public transportation ridership has grown faster than the percent increase in population growth over the last 30 years. So folks are choosing transit in larger numbers, or have been. Transit is also more popular. You can see it in our passenger miles traveled. In 2018, transit systems across the nation provided over 55 billion passenger miles. So that's an amazing statistic, and again, a testament to the very hard work that you all do every day. However, there were some challenges pre-COVID. And so from 2015 to 2018, and this is all taken from the National Transit Database, we were seeing transit ridership declining about 7.3% over those 4 years. And I went out to check the National Transit Database for Missouri just to see if our 3 large transit operators saw the same decline. And as you can see, It's really clear for St. Louis and KCATA. Springfield also had a similar decline in transit ridership, but because of the scale of the ridership between the three agencies, Springfield's showing up more as a straight line. So the question is, why was this happening? And the main thing causing the decline that we could target are the ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft. I went out and pulled this chart, and you can see the pretty dramatic rise in Uber ridership. These rides are in millions. And one of the APTA sites that I read through last week indicated that in big cities where you could see Uber come in, you would see as Uber rose, transit sort of fell accordingly. They were tied together. People were shifting to a different public transportation mode. And here are some other things that have been happening in the last 5 years that have also affected how people choose which mode to use. So car ownership. Over the last 5 years or so, folks can get much longer terms on their loans. You can get 60+ months. Interest rates are also quite low, so people who have not been able to traditionally get into a car can now buy a car, maybe more reasonably than they could a few years ago. Gas prices have been decreasing over the last 4 to 5 years. And then we also have things like car sharing and bike sharing and scooters, which are a different mode of public transportation. And so folks may choose those at different times also, and that will affect our transit data in the NTD. And then as we heard this morning with the security discussion, security is a big issue in urban areas. If folks don't feel comfortable, they may choose a different mode for a while, or they may choose to ban pool or some other public mode that may not be associated with a bus stop and the fixed route transit that we saw in our chart earlier. So that was through 2018, 2019. And as we all know, starting in January of 2020, we started to see the real effects of COVID-19 across our country. And so what have been the impacts of some of the initial impacts of COVID-19 on operations? You know, one of the things that we're seeing is folks are required to wear face masks, and that can be a flashpoint between operators and customers. So we have that to deal with. We've had to figure out, you all have had to figure out protective barriers. How do we protect our operators and the customers from each other so germs aren't shared? How do you update ventilation systems and airflow on vehicles so that germs aren't just circulating inside vehicles? In addition, you all have had to figure out how to provide enhanced cleaning methodologies. So as the vehicles come in, instead of cleaning trash and doing basic cleaning, now you all have to actually disinfect vehicles. And so finding innovative, efficient methods to be able to get that done in an evening when the vehicles come in and ready for duty the next day has been a huge burden on you all. The last bullet on this slide says prioritization of high ridership corridors. This is from California. So California is still much more closed than, say, I think places in Missouri. And they're working through right now, how do they come back? As they come back, where do they bring service back? Do they focus on the highest ridership corridors or just open the system up as it is? Also, this is also from California, you know, as you open up, we still need to have social distancing. So how does that work on a fixed route transit system? Do you need more frequent service and actually more buses in service because your capacity is lowered? So do you need more buses to provide that service on especially high ridership routes? You know, do you go to digital ticketing and contactless payment systems? I think a lot of systems right now are doing no fares so that folks don't have to touch the fare box, or there's no interaction with drivers. But as we move into reopening, does that stay? Do you continue to board through the rear of the vehicle to, again, maintain that social distancing between your operators and your customers? And other mobile apps that can help folks, especially folks with compromised immune systems or who need to be more careful about not being in contact with folks with COVID. who might have those underlying conditions? Are there apps where they can see which bus is on your route? Could provide them with that enhanced cleaning, the enhanced social distancing, and ticketless fares, things like that. So those are some of the impacts that we've been seeing so far as we go through 2020. And I don't know about you all, but I know that my family and I, we're kind of done with 2020. It's been a crazy year, and I'm sure you all are as well. So Ava is going to take over and walk us through what some of the options are coming forward in the future.
Hello everyone, here let me bring up my section of the slides now. There's a little bit of a delay on the screen share. All right, give me 1 second. As this is pulling up, just to kind of introduce myself a little bit, I've been with FTA for about 1.5 years now. Prior to that, I was working with the Kansas City district of MoDOT, overseeing local projects, so federal highway funding. So I've kind of been in the federal realm, but on the state side for a while. And now I've got to finally switch over to transit, which has been a major passion of mine for, well, pretty much as long as I can remember. So this has been a exciting move, and you guys probably haven't had too much interaction with me since I've been on the transit side here, because I've been working the 3 other states in our region. But starting this summer now, I've got, since we brought on Jerry, she's taking Iowa, Nebraska, and I will be over Kansas and finally back to my home state of Missouri. So I'm looking forward to interacting with you all. And yeah, as Jerry said, now I will be taking over the, okay, now what do we do section of this presentation. So our world's been filled with a lot of uncertainties here the last few months, you know, mask, no mask, will I get sick? Will I get really sick if I do? Am I, you know, sick and not knowing it and passing it on? What's open, what's not open? All these kind of things. But as we start settling into this new way of life, the new normal, I'm sure we're kind of a little tired of that phrase, but it is the reality of things have changed, we're adapting. But then we start thinking about the bigger picture things and how that's going to impact our cities going forward. And so the next couple of slides aren't an exhaustive list by any means, but they're more just kind of different ideas that are starting to come up in the planning and the transit world as to how things might be changing in our urban environment, in our developed areas, our travel patterns, and the ways that we are building our communities might change. They may stay the same. We don't know yet, but that's what some of these things are here to kind of get the conversation started, get some ideas in your head as to, you know, just have those light bulbs go off of, oh, this might be something that might be starting to happen. Maybe we should integrate that into our planning or thinking about the future, and just kind of trying to be more proactive and less reactive instead of like scrambling wherever they do happen. Maybe we can be aware of them a little bit beforehand. So one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of talk on is mode shift in travel patterns. Will people return to transit? Hopefully. And in what way will they come? You know, what kind of number of rebounds will we see? We have already been seeing an increase in transit. Of course, you know, right after the initial shutdowns, transit usage was way down. Our percentages were pretty low. We have seen a rebound. They're of course not up to pre-COVID levels, but we are seeing people coming back more and more. And so then one of the questions becomes of, well, what kind of travel patterns will there be? And then 2, we've been seeing impacts on other modes, and how does that interact with the interconnectedness of transit? So we've seen about a 90% decrease or more in Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing apps. You know, what's their longevity? What will their return be like? And how does that factor into first and last mile connections? And also, you know, will they continue to take us away the ridership from transit if there's not as much usage of them? Another mode that has seen some increases during the pandemic has there's been a lot more cycling, whether or not that's been for people commuting or if it's recreational, just in general, there's been a lot more people out on bicycles. And so with that, there's an increased awareness of the infrastructure that exists, which is, been competing for public space with vehicles. And two, will this be something that in the future, maybe we'll be seeing more of a demand for bicycle infrastructure associated with transit, like bike racks at stops, on the buses, that kind of thing, and the interconnectivity with bike share and transit systems. Another thing to talk about with travel patterns is the era of the essential worker. Your healthcare, food service, first responders, all those kind of things, those people have still had to continue to work. We heard yesterday Talby from St. Louis talking about how one of the major grocery stores had called him up and thanked him for still being able to get the workers to the jobs and everything there to do with the food service. And so these are things that no matter what happens, we're still going to have to get people from point A to point B. And so how do we adjust our transit systems to that? And maybe these are things that might be good to connect to anyway, of healthcare and food and your major employment centers that can't telework. And that's kind of a good segue into the next major item that there's been a lot of talk about, is your impact on your office space, central business districts, other just kind of commercial areas with the rise of teleworking. You know, there was some telework before the pandemic, but really now there's been a lot more comfortability with it with employers and supervisors. Everybody's had to shift pretty much over to working from home, at least for a short period of time. And now, like some of us, such as most of us here on the conference, are still working from home. And so there's been just a lot of adjustments there, and maybe going forward, there'll be a lot more increased in telework. Employers might realize how much they're spending on overhead and decide that it's better to just have their employees at home and dedicate some space to meeting space. Because at some point in time, we will return to in-person something. Now, whether or not that's every day in the office or just coming together for meetings to have that face-to-face interaction and collaborate on things, we'll see what kind of, how that develops and evolves. And then also with that too, if you're not seeing people face-to-face every day, maybe there'll be an increased need for networking spaces and networking events and that kind of thing. So will there be more event space needs? Also, co-working spaces spaced throughout the community might become something that we'll see more and more of, because if you have you and your spouse both working from home with an important meeting, maybe you have a roommate that's also needing something going on, and your kids are trying to do virtual learning. I mean, you have all of these different competing needs in a small area. You could possibly need to temporarily be somewhere else in some kind of office space, if not your own office space. Another area that's had some talk is the impact on retail. So we were already kind of seeing in a lot of cities impact on commercial space, the retail apocalypse, and this has been more just an acceleration of that. And there's been a lot of increase in freight demand, which could potentially have some conflict points with transit as you're trying to utilize the same place, whether or not it's, semi-infrastructure conflicting with buses, or if you've got demand for your rail, if you happen to have a rail system, that there's competition there as freight increases. And then there's also been some mentioning of there'll be increased demand for increased competition for your operators, people that have CDLs and rail operators. As the freight increases, there'll be more demand and competition there potentially. Residential growth patterns is one that there's been a lot of talk on too, kind of coupling with that central business district impact of, will people return to the suburbs? If you're teleworking and not having to commute into an office every day, will you still want to live close to the city or not? We've been seeing, in the last few years, there's really been what's kind of been called an urban renaissance of small towns having apartments built in them, downtowns having a lot of growth going on, little other urban centers popping up. and that kind of thing. And so will this continue, or will we see another like suburbanization push going on as a result of the pandemic? A lot of the growth that we had previously seen in the urban settings was residential, which kind of implies that there's a demand to live close to amenities. So that could continue after the pandemic. But then again, also there could be more of a demand for additional space, because we've all now had to deal with being cramped in our own little house. So if that happens to be a small area, maybe you're going to be wanting more living space in the future, or accommodations for a home office. I mean, you might be able to see, I'm currently sitting in a living room or in my dining room because I don't have an additional bedroom to set up a home office for. And that's been a little bit of a challenge through the pandemic. And so we may see, each individual person wanting more space. And so that impacts our density in these urban areas. And that ties directly in with your fixed line transit needs at certain densities. And so then, of course, the really big unknown that a lot of us are facing when you're talking with the transit agencies is the funding. Will there be additional relief funds at a federal, state, local level? We don't know at this point. What kind of impact is there on fare revenue, or should agencies continue with a zero fare? There's benefits to that, and then there can be potential downsides. So like that conversation, there was a good talk on that yesterday, and that continues to be a debate. Also, just declining tax revenue overall. There's been a sharp decrease in sales tax in some areas. We may see some property tax impacts as things go on of your commercial and your office space being impacted. And so depending on what your revenue structure is, this could be an issue. And then can't not mention here that the FAST Act does expire in the end of September here. And so we will have a federal reauthorization of a transportation bill. And there's been, different talks, different proposals as to what that new bill might look like. But at this point in time, it's still a big unknown for all of us. So now with all of that, kind of you're left with well, now what? What do we do moving forward? So talking about, the main big issue that's pressing to a lot of us right now is the cost side, that funding, the economic side of it. We kind of brainstormed and pulled together some different resources for some low/no cost improvement options for your transit agencies there. Like a lot of times bus lanes, especially a temporary one, why traffic may be down due to shifting traffic patterns from the pandemic, just some simple signage and some quick paint, which if anybody's ever had to work with Public Works Department knows that may not necessarily be simple, but it's a relatively low cost way to institute operational improvements. If you can get either partially dedicated or fully dedicated route there on some of your primary corridors. Signal timing is another thing that if you happen to already have the infrastructure in place on your signals, maybe just some simple adjustments to help the operations of your routes. There's been some talk of coordination with larger employers to stagger start times so that you don't have as much demand on your peak hours. Maybe your peak then gets stretched out over a few hours, and so you're able to social distance more, and you're also just not putting as much stress on your system then. There's been some different pilot projects for new mobility options. Kansas City Transit actually has been doing, it's on the Kansas side more, but the the microtransit project that they've had has shown some good results there. And so sometimes some of these routes may actually be more efficient and cheaper if you switch to more of a microtransit on demand kind of thing in some of the more spread out areas. So there's different pilot projects looking at that. Social media for awareness and information sharing. Like this is a good, often free tool that exists that just, obviously you have to have an employee be able to occasionally put up some information, but most of these platforms are a good way to get information out to the public. And in a time of a lot of uncertainties, some people may not know what all your agencies are doing in order to clean the buses and the protective barriers and all of those different measures that you're taking. And so social media can be a good, cheap way to get that information out to people. And also just simply making them aware of, hey, we are still operating. I know a lot of things are closed because of the pandemic, but transit is still there for you. We are still an option. And then different partnership opportunities. You know, there's been some talks, I know on some of the sessions yesterday, of different partnership passes, that kind of thing. You also can have other public funding sources. Federal Highway has a few different funding pots that can be flexed over to FTA. CMAQ and STP are usually good ones to look for and compete for there, and yeah, have funding for transit. There's also the Coordinated Council on Accessibility and Mobility that looks at different other federal funding sources that are available for mobility, for transportation. And so looking at different sharing opportunities to reduce that redundancy and other ways to fund things. And then also just simply coordination with other infrastructure projects. You know, if you've got a roadway project or a utility project coming through a part of town that happens to be one of your major routes, maybe you can get some bus stops improvements in there, or something to improve walkability, to improve your corridor. That would be something that would be happening already, but just through that coordination with the infrastructure project, that you're able to get your improvements in there too. And then and then also more short-term options here. FTA does host the recovery listing sessions, and we have a forum that we've set up to kind of let everybody know and discuss different best practices that are emerging throughout the country. Since this is, you know, an ever-evolving thing, we want to provide you with some of those different opportunities to discuss different things happening. And MPTA is hosting another one here on September 24th. The registration closes on the 16th, and so I do encourage you to sign up fast if this is something that would interest you, because it does fill up pretty quickly. And then another thing, just kind of in the short term and in general, be sure to pay attention to our NOFOs. Sometimes those are large notice of funding opportunities for big projects, but there's also small little, like the pilot projects or studies or different things that are smaller scale and can still help out. And so yeah, there's just a variety of different NOFOs that go out. And as far as long-term impacts here, and I know I'm running a little short or a little long on time here, so I'll try to wrap it up really quickly so we can still have a little bit of time for questions, but really wanted to push the importance of being involved in local planning. You know, your MPO and your state planning offices do scenario plans as part of the long-range plans, that their intention is to account for different unknowns and find different ways to address those. And so being involved in that early on and just regularly can help you figure out what is happening in a community and how to address that at your agency. And then also your local city and county land use planning decisions. If there's the opportunity to be involved, I would encourage transit agencies to at least pay attention and shape where possible different big decisions there, so that you don't end up having spaced out things that you're trying to service, and that you actually have things associated with your lines and that kind of thing. And then also, as we are, moving forward with all these uncertainties, and just there's a lot of talk about a lot of different things, it's important to keep in mind the very various benefits of public transit, and not just in your mind, but also everybody else's. And so there's a few different things listed here that kind of hot button items that are being talked about a lot right now. One of those could be equity, your socioeconomic and racial distributions in your cities, and how that ties in with where your transit dependent populations are, and how public transportation can be a good way to connect people to opportunities. Public health and air quality, large contributor to your emissions are your single occupancy vehicles. And during a pandemic that's associated with a respiratory illness, maybe it's a good time to point out that transit improves your air quality. Same with public health, it gets you to be more active. And then public space utilization. This has to do with how much space cars take up, your wide roadways, your vast amount of parking lots. You've surely, you know, a lot of us have seen different restaurants in towns taking over parking spaces in order to expand their patio space just to accommodate social distancing and actually stay alive during this pandemic. Well, what if going forward they were able to keep that as revenue space? They were able to actually have that still. Well, how do they still get people to their restaurant? Well, that's where transit comes in. And so like there's some different ideas of maybe we don't need to have as much space going to cars and have transit. Transit is your option there. And I think I have left just a few minutes for questions, so I will open it back up to the whole rest of the panel here and start seeing what we got in the chat box.
Hi, Ava. This is Jerry. So we got a question about sharing our presentation. Mallory, would you all be distributing that to everyone? Because we're more than happy to do that. Which I think
You're muted.
I'm so sorry. I can set that up where we can put that on the website if you guys are willing to share. Just send me over a copy of the presentation, either in a PDF or whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll get that up.
okay.
Thank you.
We'll combine Jerry and send that over to you here.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Any other questions? Well, it looks to me like you guys may have covered everything pretty well. I know that you know, we're all very excited that Missouri was the first to get funding from the CARES Act. How cool is that? And so, you know, we thank you guys for your hard work on that as well. But I think we'll just wrap early if there's no other questions. To find my right piece of paper here. There we go. All right. So we definitely want to thank everyone for their time today, because that's really important. And thank you for dealing with all the technical issues with us and really sticking with us here. And we want to thank everyone who spoke on the panel. So thank you again, FTA. And as a reminder, we have the workshop will be recorded, and just like we discussed, we will also share those presentations as well. Did you guys want to say anything else before we wrap up? No? Okay, just want to make sure. So those recordings will be posted to the MPTA website in the next couple of days with the presentations, and we've got one more session to wrap up the MPTA Virtual Conference 2020, first ever, coming up next, and it's very exciting stuff, I'm sure. So stay tuned and look for that link in your inbox. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.